So we discussed modifying vegetation properties like leaves, waxing properties and so on, which would change the albedo. We will add just a few more details here from this book, Cooling the Earth with Crops, with this chapter written by Taraka Davis Barnard. Here are some details. So this goes a little bit beyond just talking about leaf properties. So it's looking at the reflected shortwave and canopy albedo. So that's the incoming shortwave and being reflected by albedo A. Then you also have long wave radiation being reflected, which also depend on various properties of the vegetation. So this is scattering and reflecting and absorbing versus emitting long wave radiation. And then there is heating of the ground because of that. There are also evapotranspiration from the trees, which depend on the differences in vapor pressure deficit, for example, differences in vapor pressure in the atmosphere and within the leaves. And then you have, of course, the roughness of the trees and vegetation that is offered to wind speed, which affects some energy exchange between the land and the atmosphere as well. Okay, so in general, vegetation has a darker surface, and the canopy albedo is lower than bare surface or a desert, for example. So the book generally talks about looking at the various properties in the visible. So you have solar energy coming in the visible here. Of course, that's the peak energy arriving to the surface. And then you have the leaf reflectance in terms of percentages in the visible, which you want to increase if you want to play with the albedo to shortwave. And then leaf reflectance also has properties in the near infrared where the thermal energy is being lost. So that's the idea of trying to modify properties to change infrared reflections. And here is the energy from the the sun in the near infrared. Obviously drops off fairly quickly. Incoming light is reflected, absorbed, and then transmitted by the leaves. So there are various waxes that are secreted by the leaves for managing water and insects and other properties, and the properties of albedo will depend on the leaf area index, leaf angle distribution, background reflectance. So that's the overall albedo, for example, and also depends on the solar zenith angle. So the glint or the reflectance can be different for different times of the day. Okay, so remember that the plants need solar energy for photosynthesis, so they have evolved to manage, for example, the surface roughness by not necessarily aiming to change energy balance with the atmosphere, but they are competing for sunlight, for other resources, and this, once the transition happened from living in the ocean onto land, they had to develop hard structures so they could stand up. And once they could stand up and they started modifying the planetary boundary layer, they had to compete to get taller to be able to grab more sunlight. And then you need other properties like maximizing surface area to volume to harvest sunlight, stomatal conductance to open and capture CO2 without losing too much water vapor, which is extracted or supplied up from the roots, and so on and so forth. So lots of details exist, and that's what we are talking about here in terms of how their properties at long wave and shortwave are affected by leaf areas, leaf angles, canopies, leaf angle distributions, background reflectance, and so on. Okay, so that is the leaf reflectance, how bright or how dark it is, and the canopy morphology itself in terms of its shape and whether it's a tree that goes up straight or if it spreads, and so on and so forth. We looked at this model result in a previous podcast in the Planet Remade, and this is showing summertime statistically significant mean temperature decreases from a 0.04 increase in crop albedo. So you can see the temperature differences for June, July, August. There are places where it's cooled pretty significantly, including at places where there is not much crop area, because here you're looking at the crop area that's used to modify the crop albedo. So you can see that even in regions where there is not much crop area, you get changes in temperature because of modified albedo over crop areas. This is the non-local effect. And in the model results, we also saw that places like India ended up with soil moisture loss because of the changes in temperature. So there are dynamical changes which end up affecting rainfall distribution and soil moisture, which means crop yield is going to be affected. So obviously there is always the issue of avoiding unintended consequences. I will just add one little thing here from Klaus Lackner on the use of artificial trees. He argues about the role of artificial trees as a part of the geoengineering, and explains here briefly how his approach is different. So in our approach, the carbon capture is staged, and the output of the first stage is a stream with a low partial pressure of carbon dioxide that can take on several forms. Firstly, a stream of carbon dioxide with some water vapor and little other admixtures at a total pressure between 5 and 10 kilopascals, raising the temperature to about 45 degrees, increases the pressure. A stream of carbon dioxide enriched air or nitrogen or oxygen at ambient or subambient pressure with a carbon dioxide partial pressure of around 5 kilopascal, and clean bicarbonate solution produced by washing the loaded resin in a clean carbonate solution. The solution must be substantially free of other anions like sulfates or chlorides that otherwise it would deactivate the sorbent. So this is to increase the efficiency, and eventually they want to also reduce the size of this artificial tree because right now it's too big. So there is a lot of research his lab is doing on this in Arizona, and whether artificial trees will become big part of the solution or not has to be seen, but the research goes on. And when you consider overall geoengineering solutions, artificial trees, artificial photosynthesis, artificial leaves, and all are in the mix, not just for directly capturing carbon, but also for extracting hydrogen using artificial photosynthesis, artificial leaves, for fuel cell energy sources, or using energy via fuel cells, and so on and so forth. So this idea of using passing air to scavenge CO2 out of it is interesting, because as we said, the concentration is only 0.04%. So anything we do has to scale up to allow, you cannot have so much flow through without spending a lot of energy. So how do you extract a lot of CO2 out of this very small trace amounts that are present in the air? That's the key question. So that means not having a very big tree, and also having the cost of carbon per ton being reasonable, and so on. So all the same questions keep coming, but technologies are being developed and tested and trying to be scaled up.